Hello everyone and welcome back. It's been a couple of weeks since my last Flashback Friday video, but I'm back today with another Star Wars vehicle from Kenner's very successful 1990s line, or as it was better known, Power of the Force 2 line. And this week I'm going to be turning my attention and looking back at the Rebel Snowspeeder with electronic lights and sounds. Now, like a lot of the early vehicles released in this line, they were essentially reproductions of the vehicles that had come before in the 1980s line, although they were slightly scaled up and they had new paint decos and lights and sounds in many cases. And the Snowspeeder is no exception. So without further ado, I'm going to dive straight in and take a look at this fantastic packaging. Now this box is sort of mid-range, it's not absolutely gigantic, it's nowhere near the size of the Millennium Falcon box for example, but it's a good chunky size. I suppose it's an equivalent of the X-Wing or the TIE Fighter. And as such, they have plenty of space to really make the most impact here. And as we can see, they've applied the standard Star Wars branding that we saw on the Kenner line. We have Darth Vader's helmet in the corner there, the Star Wars logo. We do have the chunky red lightsaber blade behind the vehicle, although this seems to be a lot chunkier and it seems to be a lot more gradients in the colours that I'm used to seeing in this line. I don't know whether that's just my eyes, but I think this looks particularly striking here. And then of course we have the vehicle up front and centre with some cheeky blast effects, laser effects coming out of the laser ports there. And then on the ground we can actually see a little bit of snow. Now the way they've lit the vehicle on this packaging looks really, really nice. They've done a really nice job. You can see there's actually like a red or orange sort of glow against the side of it, so obviously they had a red light source there somewhere to just give that nice glow there, and it just gives it an extra dimension and texture, which I think makes this packaging really attractive and just makes it a lot more colourful and pop a lot more. So I think this is absolutely fantastic to put on display, and it seems to stand out a little bit from the others in this line. When we flip the packaging, we can see there's not really much in terms of art style or design here. It is essentially a black void. It's quite text heavy as we account for the various different languages in Europe, and we have some images of the toy itself. Again, we can see the cockpit open there. We can see with the figures inside, which looks pretty attractive. We have some highlights of the various action features on this vehicle, and then on the right hand side we have this sort of fact file that can be cut out. Now I never did this. I don't know anyone who ever did. I'm not quite sure why you would as a kid. I mean, maybe you could use them as trading cards, I'm not quite sure, but I suppose there's meant to be an added fun element there, which completely went over my head as a kid. But nevertheless, that is a feature of this packaging. Obviously this isn't the most displayable, this isn't the size you're going to want to put on your shelf, but it's absolutely fine and serviceable, and it's more functional than anything else. Now, I've always had a soft spot for the Snowspeeder. I've always just liked the dimensions and the design of the vehicle. It looks quite cool and compact and like a proper little fighter. And I think they've done a really nice job of capturing the nuance and detail of this vehicle in this toy. It looks pretty screen accurate to me, and it actually has an awful lot of colour and detail, which was a slight improvement on the original release from the 1980s. They've managed to achieve this attention to detail through the sculpting, but also the paint apps that we see on this vehicle, which I think are absolutely crucial. We have these dark areas of black paint running throughout the vehicle, which indicates that it's seen some blaster fire, that it's been a little bit lived in, a little bit used, it's seen some battles and survived. And I think they've done a really nice job of just giving that extra little bit of detail, a little bit of nuance in terms of the overall texturing. And then this is taken one step further when we take into account the transfers that are on this vehicle as well, which add that splash of colour, which make all the difference. And I'm always impressed by how these transfers actually add so much detail when it comes to circuitry or wiring, or just in this case a lot of colour. It just really helps this vehicle pop. A really good example of this can be found when we lift up the cockpit, and we can see that on the inside of the cockpit lid we actually have this wonderful transfer which just adds a lot more detail and texture than you'd think to add. So I think this is a really lovely touch, and it just makes it look a lot more authentic and realistic. Likewise, on the top of the seat there we just have some buttons and circuitry just achieved through a simple transfer, but it makes all the difference and makes this a lot more colourful, fun and inviting. Now, one thing that's really cool about this vehicle is that it will sit 2 figures at the same time. Now, I'm not picking the right figures for this. I do appreciate that I'm putting Boba Fett in, and I'm using Boba Fett because, well, he fits in quite neatly and snugly into that back seat, and he's one of my all-time favourite figures in this collection, so I like to use him whenever I can. And then I'm using Luke Skywalker in his Hoth gear for the front of the vehicle. Again, completely inappropriate choice. But unfortunately, my Rebel pilot Luke Skywalker is currently unavailable to use for this demonstration. Anyway, these figures fit in very, very comfortably. Not all figures will, depending on how they're sculpted and moulded. For example, I really struggled to get the Han Solo in his Hoth gear into this vehicle, but then he wasn't made for it. But the lid will come down and slot securely into place, and we can see the figures through the windows. I know this is such a little thing, but I always really enjoy this, and it's really nice to be able to see the figures peeping out from within the vehicle. Now, for a mid-range vehicle, this does have a few fun action features. First of all, it does have the gun or the turret on the back of the vehicle, which can move from side to side, and it hinges up and down as well. And of course, it also comes with a firing missile with that tow cable attached, which is absolutely fantastic. Now, you can attach the base of this missile to the base of the exhaust of the speeder, and when you attach it in place like this with this little block at the end there, that makes sure it's always permanently tethered. You can slide in the missile, and of course there is a firing mechanism that will make sure that it stays attached to the vehicle at all times to recreate that sense of being tethered when it wraps up the AT-AT's legs. Pleasingly, underneath the vehicle you can see that they've not neglected to add some paint and some transfers here as well to give this an overall feeling of authenticity, which is really, really nice to see. And you will also notice that this has a landing gear, which can be released by simply moving the switch at the back of the base. This will help the front end of the vehicle stand up level with the rear end as well, so it looks as if it's sort of hovering above the ground, which is pretty cool. But that's not the end of the features, because of course we also have those lights and sounds, and if we press the buttons at the very back and the base of the vehicle, we have 2 sound effects. And to give you a sense of scale, here is the vehicle next to some standard 3/4 inch Star Wars figures from this Power of the Force 2 line. So as you can see, this looks to be pretty approximate to what I'd expect from this scale, and I think these figures work very, very nicely in alignment with this particular vehicle. This looks really, really cool. And overall, I have to say, this is a really fun vehicle. This isn't one that I had when I was a kid. I've actually managed to track this one down and buy it for myself as an adult, but I'm immensely pleased with it. It was one I always wanted, and I have to say, it's tremendous. I actually think this is a vast improvement over the original release in the 1980s, and I love these lights and sounds and all of its various bits and pieces. I love these new transfers and the new paint apps in particular. I think it really pushes this over the top, and it looks absolutely fantastic. So a really fun vehicle to add to this lineup if you don't have it already. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.